and I bet it's live now, but for some strange reason with YouTube, they go live right before they indicate to me that we're live. And yes, we're live now, and I'm going to take away a couple of so we won't echo. All right. So the Real Nordic Black Family. This my YouTube channel, The Real Nordic Black. Thank you for everybody who tuned in. I've put out the word that I have a live interview with Kristen Dumais, the professor and historian, writer and speaker of history, gender, urban studies, and author of the book New Gospel for Women and Jesus in John Wayne, How White Evangelicals Corrupted a Faith and Fractured a Nation. And that was the main reason why I got her here. I wanted to talk about that book. She's has a website as well. That I'll drop the link underneath this interview and video, where she has talks about topics like religion and politics, Christianity and feminism, Christian thought and history, daily living, and she also has a book club, J&JW for Jesus and John Wayne, and speaking requests, and many resources on there where she has her lectures, interviews, articles, books, and podcasts. Also, do you have a podcast as well?
Or is no, I just go on other people's podcasts right now.
Got you. So, could you introduce yourself and some of the points that I haven't mentioned or whatever? I know you're in Grand Rapids, Michigan, correct?
Yeah. I'm a history professor at Christian University in Grand Rapids, Michigan.
Calvin University, correct? I forgot to mention that. And also, I forgot to mention the how I found you. That's important. The atheist Seth Andrews.
Yeah.
Yes. He probably about a week ago, he had posted, I think it was a week ago, he posted about your book on his blog, Thinking Atheist, and which I'm a follower of. So I was like, man, let me check. I like the title. It was very appealing to me. So first off, I guess we could start with the title. How did that come about?
Yeah.
Jesus and John Wayne.
We have the title and then the subtitle. I'll start with the title.
Yeah.
Jesus and John Wayne. Essentially, this gets at the heart of the book. The idea of it's a book about white evangelical masculinity and militarism. And by looking at popular evangelical literature, these books have sold millions and millions of copies that are really off the radar for a lot of people who are not evangelical. Never heard of these authors probably, but it's a really big thing within the evangelical subculture. And I was reading a lot of these books on evangelical masculinity, and I noticed one, just how militant the conceptions of quote unquote Christian manhood were. And I also noticed how little many of these books drew on the Christian scriptures, on the Bible. And instead they were looking to popular culture. They were looking to Hollywood movies for these models of rugged, aggressive masculinity, which then they called Christian manhood. And so the actor John Wayne popped up frequently. So did Mel Gibson's William Wallace from the movie Braveheart. And frankly, if I could have squeezed that into a book title somehow, I might have gone with that. But really kind of embracing these secular models of warrior masculinity, baptizing them, and then not just shaping Christian manhood according to these secular warrior heroes, but also essentially changing Christianity itself into a militant faith. And that's really the essence of this book.
Yeah, and you go into the development of that, the ideology of Christian masculinity, or would you like to call it the militant? What do you call it? Yeah, the militant masculinity, or like some people like to call it toxic masculinity these days.
Yeah.
Right. Would you say that there's also a thing called toxic femininity as well?
Sure, that's a topic of my next book, actually.
So, okay, right.
Yeah, Yeah, it's interesting though, because I don't use the phrase toxic masculinity
I
in
noticed
Jesus
that.
and John Wayne.
I noticed
I
that.
wondered if you picked up on that.
Yeah.
That's a popular handle. It certainly gets at what I'm talking about. The
Right.
reason I didn't use that is it's of relatively recent vintage, right? And I'm a historian, so I'm just trying to describe things as they develop through history. And I also knew that that language communicated very well to people who already kind of understand what toxic masculinity is and who are
Right.
critics of it. But I wanted to really describe this world, this culture to people who are also still inside the culture. And toxic masculinity is a phrase that kind of shuts things down and only communicates to certain people and not to others. And so I found that I just didn't kind of use that as a crutch. Instead, I just described what it was that I was talking about and how ideas of aggressive masculinity developed over time and how they became synonymous with, you know, quote unquote faithful biblical manhood in certain white conservative evangelical circles.
Right. Um, yeah, and there you say you talk a lot about white patriarchal authority as well,
Mhm.
authoritarianism.
Yes,
Um, I like to just call it white supremacy racism here on my channel.
that works.
Uh, it you said in there that it was no aberration, or was it a pragmatic choice? Uh, could you elaborate on
Yeah.
that a little bit?
Yeah, and that I was
further?
talking about voting for Donald Trump in
Right.
particular, right?
Mm,
So,
mm,
you know, around that time when we saw the levels of enthusiasm among white evangelicals when it came to voting for Donald Trump back in 2016, a lot of the media narrative and the narrative within evangelical circles itself was that somehow evangelicals had betrayed their values
mm.
to vote for somebody like Donald Trump, right? These are family values evangelicals. This is the self proclaimed moral majority. How could they? And so there are all these theories that they were holding their noses to vote for him
Because
or,
you know, in Norway here,
yeah,
a lot of people are just wondering. They're like,
yeah,
how in the hell did you guys get that guy in? I mean, the whole world seems to shun him and hate him. And when he's out in the G8 summit or whatever, you see
yeah,
how he's acting, and the whole
yeah,
world just seems to not like him or whatever. How in the hell did you
yeah.
guys?
We have to explain it.
Right, right, right.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that was a lot of the narrative. They're hypocrites or they had betrayed their values.
Mm, mm,
That did not ring true to me because I understood that there was a longer history here, a much longer history
right.
of white evangelicals embracing this rugged, aggressive, patriarchal, white patriarchal
Mm,
authority.
mm.
And the ends would justify the means, right? They liked men who would do what needed to be done. They were very quick to forgive any any faults, including abuse and abuse of power and sexual abuse within their
Tell me
own
about it.
circles. I
Right,
knew that history. And
right.
so I said, you know, that's not actually what's going on here. We have to understand that in many ways, white evangelical support for Donald Trump is the fulfillment of their values. We just have to understand better what those values are. So we
They
look at family values evangelicalism.
the
We have
savior
to,
role. They put
yeah,
Trump as the for the savior role, as you called it.
exactly. He's in a long
Mm,
line. And we have
mm,
to understand that, you know, family values at the core, what we're talking about is the assertion of white patriarchal authority.
mm.
Then it makes sense.
Like you said, in reality, evangelicals did not cast their vote despite their beliefs, but because of them.
Yeah, exactly.
That was, and then also we you talk about how Christian nationalism, how the belief in America is, of course, God's chosen nation, and how they, more than any other religious demographic in America, white evangelical Protestants support preemptive war, condone use of torture, favor death penalty, oppose immigration, gun ownership, and things of that nature.
Mhm.
Um, so you really get into this thing, and then also you get into the African American, this little segment talking about African Americans a lot, and I'm really interested in that. But
Mhm.
before we do that, could we start in chapter one, saddling up a little bit? Um, I encourage everybody to go get the book though. Is it in is I got it on Kindle, and I
Mhm.
remember as we were communicating, you were just putting it to book form, or they were about to be
It's
published,
out
or
in
is it
paperback.
paperback?
Yeah, out in
Okay,
paperback just
right,
last week, and
okay,
so it's
right.
available Audible. is an audiobook. It's Kindle, and it's also hardcover and paperback right now.
Okay, and they can get it directly from what publishing company or Amazon and whoever? Yeah,
It's available. It should be available everywhere. Yeah.
everywhere. Got you, got you. No, anyway, speaking of Seth, not Seth Rogen, but Seth, I can't, the atheist I
Yes.
told you about. Seth Andrews, excuse me, out of Tulsa, Oklahoma. So you obviously heard of him, correct?
Yeah.
Oh, have you guys communicated or?
So let me remember, this is a friendly atheist. Is that who we're talking about? Or I actually have done a number of interviews and seen reviews from a number of prominent atheist bloggers and radio and so on. So it's popular in those circles.
Yeah, got you. Okay, yeah. Well, anyway, we'll just get back to the chapter 1. Saddling up, when you get into the icon of Christian masculinity, John Wayne, masculinity problem and feminization. Could you elaborate on that? You talked a lot about the former president Theodore Roosevelt.
Theodore Roosevelt, yeah.
Who Theodore Roosevelt, see him sound Norwegian. Theodore Roosevelt.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so way too dang long, but go ahead. Yeah.
What I do in that first chapter is a couple of things. First of all, I need to set out as a historian that things have not always looked like they do today. Right. I need to show that this kind of militant Christian masculinity did not exist throughout all time. It came into form at a particular moment in U.S. history, and so we can see that in the 19th century, Victorian ideals of Christian manhood were not this aggressive, rugged ideal. It was, a self-restraint, a gentlemanly self-restraint. That said, in the American South, we do have more of a model of this kind of Christian patriarchal authority and militancy. And when I started to write this book, I thought I was writing a book about gender. Very quickly, I realized I was also writing a book about race. And so the white in the white evangelicals part of the subtitle is very relevant. This is a book about white patriarchy. I'm sure you got a lot of backlash on I have been called a racist more than once because I use the word white in the subtitle. Yes. But I mean, as a historian, I'm just describing. Yeah. I'm being precise about who I'm talking about. Yeah. So then it's so we have conflicting models of Christian masculinity in the 19th century. It's in the early 20th century that there's kind of this unity among Northerners and Southerners around a muscular Christianity, and Teddy Roosevelt embodies that very well. And it's also you get into Billy Graham a lot throughout the James Dobson, Falwell. Things really pick up later, like around the 1940s. But Billy Graham heavy. Billy Graham's very important here because he's seen by many evangelicals and I remember as almost like apolitical, right? That he is this, there's kind of elderly man that it's all about just spreading the gospel, and that or crusades as he his gospel crusades. Right. So I really worked to make the earlier Graham known. I have this great picture in the book that he is vigorous and he is masculine. Yep. Everybody thought he was so handsome. He was also very patriarchal, and he was extremely Christian nationalist, right? So his evangelism, his gospel truth was thoroughly intertwined with Christian nationalism and with gender traditionalism, with patriarchy. I like how you pointed out as well and reminded the audience, whoever's reading your book, that he was a lifelong registered Democrat. Yes. So we have to understand politics here and the political realignment. And the connection to him that when he started was in 1954, the first prayer breakfast, and he also National Prayer Breakfast. Before congressional meetings, he started out with prayers and things like that. And also you talk about how the following year with Eisenhower, how he incorporated the "In God We Trust" into the America's national currency or money. That and all these things happen kind of around that time frame, and Billy Graham definitely had his he was hands in a lot of stuff, and central to also Dwight Eisenhower, although he wasn't, as you said, wasn't so religious. They had a close relationship, and he It was
He
mutually
had he
beneficial,
yeah,
right?
correct.
Yeah.
What did you say?
And
It
this
was,
was,
it was like 60% of evangelicals, something
mhm,
on the vote that
yeah.
they had.
Yeah. And I mean, this is the Cold War, right? The early Cold War era. And that's a really critical context for
There you
understanding
go.
how all
Yeah.
these things come together. Because evangelicals understood that they needed to defend the nation, they needed to defend Christian America, and that required a military defense.
Mm.
And that played into the hands of Eisenhower and his intentions perfectly. And so you have this mutually beneficial relationship. Now, the thing is, in the 1950s, that wasn't so different from, most Americans. This was the consensus era. This was, the post-war baby boom. These quote unquote traditional family values were not exclusive to conservative evangelicals. Where that changes is in the 1960s with the civil rights movement, the feminist movement, and the Vietnam War and the anti-war movement, right?
Well,
And that's when this becomes an oppositional
I
identity.
also want to add into that the civil rights movement and Billy Graham, because
Yeah.
you mentioned about him and Brown versus Board of Education,
Yeah.
how he appraised it at the same time. There was a little contradictions in there, and also he was opposed for it going too fast, and he
Yeah.
written a letter to or addressed it to the Supreme Court. Could you talk about that a little bit with
Yeah.
Billy Graham and civil rights in general? And he
Mhm.
also invited Martin Luther King
Yeah.
for a prayer at one of his New York City crusades
Mhm.
and things like that. Could you?
Yeah. So there's a story that evangelicals tell themselves about their
Yeah,
own, involvement in the civil rights movement, and
yeah.
it's one in which white evangelicals are the good guys, right? They're the
Hmm.
heroes, and so they love to point to Billy Graham
Yeah.
as this pro civil rights, evangelist and he did take down the barriers,
Mm,
at his crusades in the South to integrate,
yeah.
but he definitely had his limits,
Absolutely.
and he came up to those limits, right, in his conversations with Martin Luther King Jr. He was precisely the white moderate that Martin
Mm,
Luther King was condemning, right?
mm,
Only go so far. We will go up to the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act. There, done. You got what you asked for, and now anything more than that, back away. Take your time. And so, somebody like King did not see Billy Graham as an ally. King kept trying to challenge Graham to step up and to
mm.
fully support civil rights. And so it's very much a mixed history. And that's there are many things in this book. One, the story of Billy Graham and Billy Graham on civil rights that have really caught white evangelicals off guard. Right, the book's biggest fans are actually white evangelical readers, even though the book is
I believe
rather
that.
harsh.
The
Right.
the haters are always the biggest fans. You know
Well, I mean,
that?
for
They
many, right?
are.
These aren't
I got
haters.
I got a few myself listening right now. Trust me.
Yeah, they're just shocked. These are not the stories that they have been privy to. These are not the
Yeah.
stories that they have been told within their own communities.
Mm,
And so the book is actually shocking many evangelical readers
yeah.
simply because, I mean, I've got the evidence, I've got the sources, I've got the quotes here.
There
It's
you go.
undeniable. And so many are asking rightly, why have we never heard this before?
Scholarship beats hollership, huh?
Every once
Right.
in a while, every once in a
Right,
while.
right. And I like you also you mentioned that 25 also tied into where you say that the white evangelicals often try to use the black that they had
Yeah.
black Protestants or whatever to escape their
Yeah.
blame for racism and things like that,
Yeah.
and also that 25% African Americans. Well, we'll get into that next part right there. How
Yeah. I
they
mean,
subscribe to the four distinctives.
yeah, we can go
Yeah,
there because it's kind of important to understand. It's how we describe or how we define evangelical.
there you go.
It's a
Yeah,
very contested term,
absolutely.
and there are fights. I mean, I was just arguing with Tim Keller on Twitter yesterday about this, going back and forth, and there are different camps. And so the standard way that evangelicals themselves define themselves is around their theology.
Mm,
And so they point to four key distinctives, and these were coined by a historian named David Bebbington, and so it's known as the Bebbington Quadrilateral now. These 4 points. So what they are biblicism, so upholding the authority of the scriptures; crucicentrism, the centrality of the crucifixion, of Jesus, right, atonement, redemption; and conversionism, this born again experience, and then activism and evangelism. So you're acting out of your
spreading the
faith,
gospel, right?
spreading these beliefs, right?
Beliefs, right?
So that's the theological definition. Now, the thing is, if you use that to describe and define evangelicals, the majority of Protestants globally can check those boxes. And so it obscures any attention to American evangelicals, and particularly the role of Christian nationalism. And the majority of Black Protestants in the United States also check off those boxes. Now, here's what's interesting. The majority of Black Protestants who could check off those boxes do not identify as evangelical. And that's really important to me as a cultural historian.
And family, listen,
right.
Real Nordic Black family, listen.
Yeah, because they know that there is so much more to being evangelical than checking those boxes. And even if we look at those boxes, biblical authority, what do we mean? Which Bible verses are critical to white evangelical faith? They're not the same ones, by and large, that are critical to Black Protestant prophetic tradition. So Absolutely. Are we really talking about the same thing? Are these people going to church together? Are they going to different churches? Right? These are racially segregated.
I remember Malcolm X saying, or some speech somewhere saying that it's the most segregated.
Martin Luther King Jr. Right?
Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and many people.
Yes. Are they reading? I also look at evangelicalism as a popular culture, as a consumer culture, right? There are these vast industries of Christian publishing, Christian radio, Christian television. To me, that is what really.
Speaking of that, because we're both from the Midwest, you mentioned somewhere in your conclusion about Hobby Lobby. I was like, wow, you was breaking that down right there about Hobby Lobby.
That's what I'm talking about. This kind of cultural.
I always felt that too in Hobby Lobby when I went in there. I felt not welcome in there for some strange reason. We always went there because my grandfather, he built model airplanes and things like that. And so we went there to go to pick one out. Or glider that we would build in the summer, and I always felt for some strange reason, kind of like Cracker Barrel, Hobby Lobby. Could you get into that a little bit? And
So I mean, the idea here is that there's
being from Oklahoma, you didn't know I was from the Midwest.
This is what it means to
that
be
hit home. That hit home,
right? I mean. So it's this participating in being immersed in this evangelical consumer culture, in this subculture, really. And if you know it, right?
We're both from the Bible Belt, so pretty much.
So you walk into a Hobby Lobby store, and it is for some people, it's just a craft store, right? You go there because you need some, balsam wood for something, or it's also this kind of evangelical big box store. And so at the door, you're going to see racks and racks of white evangelical books, conservative evangelical books. But also, I mean, I take you on a little tour, just a tiny bit in the book. I've written a couple of blog pieces. I have one over at the Daily Beast on this that expands this. Christian nationalist wall decor. You can get the thin blue line police flag. You can get little police memorabilia, a little kitsch that you can put on your shelves, lots and lots of pro-military, right? Lots and lots of you can get John Wayne. I mean, I have some on my shelf back there, little John Wayne. I mean,
plaques. It says the whole store says patriarchy, authoritarianism,
gender difference, racism, right? Femininity, sweet, sexy, beautiful, and then aggressive masculinity, law enforcement, military, and the Wild West, guns. Lots of guns. You can buy fake guns to put on your wall as decor.
Oh, absolutely. So the I guess we'll go into chapter 2. There was something else when it came to the Black Protestants that I was going to ask. But anyway, you also mentioned that they when they apply their faith in ways that they ran counter to white evangelism.
So when it comes to living out your faith, right? This activism, well, what does it look like? It looks so different for white evangelicals in terms of politics than it does for Black quote unquote evangelicals. So again, are we really talking about the same thing as a historian who's trying to describe what it is that we see, these communities, who is connected to whom and who is not, and who is welcome in these spaces and who
Right.
is not, and what are the power dynamics? That's when we really do have to talk about white evangelicalism as a distinct movement.
And you also, yeah, you mentioned that it really showed itself after the 2016 election.
Yeah.
With the, like you said, the problem of whiteness.
Yes.
Yeah. Chapter 2, John Wayne will save your ass.
Yes.
Well, you get into Billy Graham. A lot of them, Bill, what was the
Billy
other guy?
Sunday, Billy
Billy Sunday,
Graham.
all
Yeah.
these Billies. I was like,
Yeah.
I noticed, Southern, those, preachers
Yeah.
were named Billy's. Bill, I don't know if it was a thing. I was like,
So
like, okay,
when we get to John Wayne will save your ass. This is
civil rights, Vietnam,
exactly the 60s,
Eisenhower.
right?
Right.
The 60s really do divide Americans one from the other, the end of this kind of consensus era. And that's when we see this ideal of a kind of rugged white patriarchal authority asserting itself in the conservative camp, in the white conservative camp, among secular conservatives and among religious conservatives. And it ends up kind of unifying them across religious differences. So we see, whereas, Catholics and Protestants had long really been at odds, particularly conservative evangelicals did not trust Catholics at all, didn't want to affiliate with them. But we see unity building around these cultural and political ideals. And so pro-war, pro-military, anti-civil rights, anti-feminist. And again, the assertion of white patriarchal authority is kind of the linchpin here. And so somebody like John Wayne emerges as the secular icon of masculinity, of conservative white masculinity, this kind of retrograde. And if you think about John Wayne's movies, think about, how he rose to stardom as a cowboy in the Wild West, as on the sands of Iwo Jima, World War II. The Green Berets, the Alamo, in all of these heroic movies,
which they're just now putting out some new information about the Alamo. How
exactly, like the actual story of the Alamo, right? This is the mythical heroic story.
I remember that movie.
Yeah,
it's
and in
very
all
long
of these,
too.
he's the white hero,
absolutely
savior, who will bring order through violence, and that violence is meted out against non-white populations, over and over again. And that's this heroic ideal that appeals to conservative white Americans in this law and order era, right? Anti-civil rights, pro-law and order, and he becomes an icon of this conservative white masculinity.
Right. And in that chapter you also add what I've spoken about the with Eisenhower, him doing the congressional meetings in 1954, added the words "one nation under God" to the Pledge of Allegiance. So Norwegians, when you hear we say "one nation under God" and all those things, that was incorporated,
it's relatively recent,
right, 1954, by the help of and influence of Billy Graham. All right. And also "In God We Trust" on the money. And then and then also the helping to wage Eisenhower and Graham. You talked about the Cold War, how they see communism as of the devil, I guess. And so you talked about the Cold War a lot, Cold War a lot, about the framing of the Cold War and moral crisis. The Barry Goldwater's luncheon, you also talked about. You got in some details in short. Could you elaborate on that there?
So what we see is in Southern California in the 1960s, as this political realignment is underway, where traditionally the Democratic Party had been home to Southern white people throughout the 20th century up until the 1960s. And then we see this realignment taking place, where increasingly we see conservative white Southerners and conservative whites moving over to the Republican Party, and the Democratic Party becoming the party of non-white folks, of labor, and of progressives. And so you see this realignment take place, and you see that in the 1964 election around Barry Goldwater, and then you see that in terms of Nixon, and then it really culminates with the 1980 election of Ronald Reagan. By then, it's really completed. We had this little blip in 1976 of Jimmy Carter, kind of disrupted things a bit. He came in post Watergate, was kind of going to restore wholesomeness and honesty, and he was a Southern Baptist Sunday school teacher and a Democrat, right? So you have this little blip, but then
you went into
turn on
then you
him.
went into Nixon as well.
Yeah.
So Billy Graham was around for a long time.
Absolutely, and always had his hands in politics. At least he pulled back post Watergate, kind of lamented his sins and over involvement, warned evangelicals about engaging politics in the way that he had, but most evangelicals didn't really listen to him, including his own son, Franklin.
Right. Now, we're not going to talk about the whole book. I'm trying to see if there's any questions in here, because usually I don't get to entertain some of these questions, or we can continue. Hold on, let me see. Any questions, anybody? Usually we have a whole host of questions. Anyway, we're not going to get into the whole book, but we're going to jump to chapter 5. Of course, I saw slaves and soldiers, where you get into the family values, and the defending of family values and the reassertion of patriarchal authority. And you talk about James Dobson and the other Bill Gothard.
Yeah. So one of the things that
and Tim LaHaye. He definitely, growing up, I definitely seen the Left Behind book series when they talk about the fictional series of the Rapture. That definitely was a big thing, when I was growing up, for sure. But can you get a little bit to...
So one of the things that I do in this book is I'm constantly kind of testing out what is fringe here within American evangelicalism, what's extreme, and then what's mainstream, and what's the connection between the extreme and the mainstream. And that's something I do very much in this chapter, where I look at somebody like Bill Gothard. Definitely extreme, right? Extremist views on patriarchy, on race, right? He's a white supremacist, absolute proponent of patriarchal authority, of female submission. He has this kind of chain of command where, teaching Christians that God ordained this social hierarchy. And so, pastors over parishioners and men over women and parents over children. And honestly, when I was reading this, I thought, wow, this is really anti-democratic, and it is. It's very authoritarian, and that surprised me, the extent to which these teachings were so authoritarian. And this is going back right to the 70s, the 60s and 70s, and so that's Bill Gothard, definitely fringe, although had a profound influence. When I first set out to write this book, I wasn't going to include him. I thought, oh, he's too fringe. So many of the people I interviewed would come and say, you are going to talk about Bill Gothard, right? Because he had this kind of underground influence. And so their families would attend his seminars, and they'd buy his literature, and they would raise their kids according to his principles, these very authoritarian principles. So that's Gothard. But then I look at, in the same chapter, James Dobson. Not fringe, right? Very, very mainstream. One of the most well-known evangelicals over the last half century that had a focus on the family ministries. He was a child psychologist. But when you look at what he's saying about patriarchy, about authority, it dovetails pretty closely with what Bill Gothard was saying. And so that's really something that I'm teasing out throughout this book. Again, what is really at the heart of family values evangelicalism? The assertion of white patriarchal authority. And so that's something I tease through. Somebody like Tim LaHaye, absolutely the same. And
before you get into Tim LaHaye, we do have a question.
Okay.
American empire and religion. How is that related?
Oh, yeah. So we could go back to Teddy Roosevelt and start talking about that, or even earlier. But somebody like Roosevelt.
I have to look. I have to look on my phone on the YouTube, because otherwise it'll echo as we're talking.
Oh, okay.
So when I look down,
no worries, no worries.
Just in case the question pops up as we're So we got 4 things going on at the same time.
So very closely linked. So this idea of American empire, of kind of is linked to the idea of being God's chosen nation.
Mm,
So, right, Christian nationalism, that we are God's chosen nation, and we can, by definition, then whatever we do is righteous.
yeah.
And God is on our side, whatever we do. And so, of course, we would want to bring this goodness to the rest of the world. And so, somebody like Teddy Roosevelt really embodies this, and he doesn't just kind of refashion himself in the Wild West as this cowboy president, but then
Mhm.
he also really eggs on, in terms of U.S. foreign policy, American empire and the Spanish-American War, and he puts together his Rough Riders, and so he just embodies this. But really, throughout the 20th century, you have echoes of this idea of America as a Christian nation, as especially blessed by God. So of course we will want to bring our righteous influence across the globe. And again, however we do so is righteous, because God is on our side. So they are very closely
That's
linked.
exactly what somebody said. Whatever we do is righteous.
Yes.
Yeah. Um. What else? Always testing. Using vision function. No, they really. Oh, always testing what is mainstream or extreme views in evangelical culture and how are they related.
Mm-hmm. I mean,
Mhm.
yeah, that's
Oh,
really what I'm doing in
basic.
the
Yeah.
book, and
Yeah.
I do that
Yeah.
throughout. So we talked about earlier, but also, this is something I'm looking at right now in American evangelicalism. There are deep divisions, and
Right.
you'll have some of these kind of never Trump evangelicals, who want to distance evangelicalism from really this populist movement,
Yeah.
and claim, oh, those aren't real evangelicals. They don't go to church enough.
Right.
They don't really know their theology. That's not who we are. But what we've seen in the
Some people think
last
I'm
5 years,
some people may think I'm a populist out here because I scream a lot about racism and the way I call things or what they think
well, this
certain
is
people are. But go
right
ahead.
wing populism
Right.
that
No,
we're talking
I
about,
know,
right?
I got
So yeah, so you see this like attempt to distance. One of the things that I do in this book is I make it a little bit harder for some of those respectable evangelical leaders to distance themselves from this larger movement that they have in fact given cover to. And I think that's one of the themes of the book. So I take on, Christianity Today,
you.
how
Right.
they platformed a fairly extreme figure in open white supremacist like Doug Wilson. Right?
Mm,
That's the kind of story that I'm teasing out here. You take an extreme example of this misogynistic patriarchy like Mark Driscoll of Mars Hill Church in the
mm,
2000s, and then you see actually, he was an influential, very influential and central figure within white evangelicalism during that era. So really, kind of not letting people off the hook who want to say, oh, that's not really who we are.
right. And another question. So how does the evangelicalism tie into capitalism? United Fruit in Guatemala, IMF keeping
Yeah.
developing countries in debt, CIA interventions. They also add, guess there is a reason why the CIA is referred to as a Christian inaction. Yeah.
Yes. Oh, good question. Big
Yeah.
question.
Yeah.
Closely linked. This conservative evangelicalism is closely linked to, or embraces and promotes free market
Mm,
capitalism. That's something I give a nod to here and there in this book. I'm doing much more with that in my next
okay.
book. So,
Gotcha.
kind of gospel
Yeah.
of capitalism, but then also very active intervention in Latin America in the 1980s. And I spent a lot of time talking about Oliver North in this book, kind of got obsessed with Oliver North as
Yeah.
a kind of case study of what this looks like. And
Right.
again, kind of neo-imperialism, and America is always on the side of what is right, even when history suggests otherwise.
And then they also say that okay, so like most movements, there is a moderate block and then an extremist block to more legitimize the moderate block. I don't know if that was a question or a statement, but
Oh yeah, I think that
anyway,
the
right,
moderate legitimizes the more extreme, and
right,
January 6th is a great example of that,
right,
looking at responses across evangelicalism.
right. All right, we'll entertain a few more questions later. But going back to Tim LaHaye and Left Behind book, fictional book series, and the Billy James fundamentalist pastor, yeah, Billy
Billy
James,
James
and
Hargis.
Yeah, Bill Gothard, uh, uh, yeah, Billy James Hargis, and also
Billy
yeah,
Graham and
oh,
Billy
Billy
Sunday. You're right.
Graham,
There's
and
a
oh
lot.
my
Yeah.
God, yeah,
Yeah, there's just a lot of people in this book too.
right,
That's the reason for that is, I mean, that's what evangelicalism is.
right,
It's this series of networks and alliances, and you
right,
have to
right,
kind of understand how they all fit together.
right, right,
Um, But yeah, Tim
And I'm
LaHaye,
glad that you did the work so I can just
it was a lot of mapping
yeah
out.
yeah
But Tim LaHaye, you know him because of the Left Behind series, right?
right,
Really, really
absolutely,
popular, millions and millions of
absolutely.
copies, like
My
tens of
mom,
millions.
ugh, yeah,
Yes.
yeah. You had to
Uh,
watch that? Yeah,
he also wrote a ton of nonfiction books, and he
yeah.
was one of the key architects of the religious right, right? Council
Hmm.
for National Policy. I mean, you want to talk Latin America, you want to talk foreign policy, just the kind of one of these linchpin figures in terms of the rise of the religious right. That's Tim LaHaye, his wife,
I was
Beverly
gonna ask you
LaHaye.
something. Just
Yeah.
for 1 second, I just came to mind. Have you heard of there was a big play in the Midwest called Heaven Gates and Hell Flames?
Oh, no, I didn't.
You've
I
never
haven't run across that. So tell me about it.
that was in the past. No, I was just asking if you.
No,
Yeah,
didn't come
okay.
up in this research, but
No,
there's a
no, it didn't. No,
lot.
I know it.
Yeah.
No, I know it didn't. But I was just asking if you personally heard of this
No,
huge.
no.
I
Yeah.
used to
So
when I was practicing Christianity or whatnot. I played a demon. I was one of the demons that took some of the people to hell and things like that. And
okay, so I may
yeah,
have, was this part of like one of those hell houses or?
no, it was at at a super mega church. These, they had
Okay,
this series
yeah.
of Heaven Gates and Hell Flame where they, well, probably you might call that's what you probably meant, Hell House. Well, we scared the hell out of people to get them
Yes,
to Christianity. So yeah, the Hell
yes, that
House.
was a
I guess
thing.
it was. I guess yeah, they basically transformed this church into a hell house, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Yeah,
And
yeah, that's a
I
thing.
was part of it at one point in time. And as a child, it was quite fun.
Yeah, yeah,
I didn't really have but anyway, that's because you're from the
yeah.
Midwest, I had to ask you that. But anyway, as you were, and they were Billy James, the fundamentalist pastor, Billy James Horowitz. You said he spearheaded the anti-communism,
Anti-communism,
when they talk about
anti-sex
sexual
ed.
morality, right?
Yep, very pro-sexual
Pro
morality until
Anti-sexual but pro-family, correct? Yeah.
pro-family. And of course, he's one of the first in this book of many to become embroiled in pretty horrific sexual scandals. I mean, his is a particularly colorful one, but there are so many in this book, right? Who
And
are,
the act
yeah,
of marriage, you talk about that. Could
Tim,
you
yes.
yeah,
That's the LaHaye's book on
right.
marriage, the act of marriage. And
It was like some
what's
rule book or some manual for
manual?
Christians. Christian
Yes,
sexual manual, correct?
sex manual.
That
Yes,
him and his
very.
wife co-authored. Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. Very graphic. And I know it set off porn filters at least one publisher that I submitted that sample chapter to. And but so yes, evangelicals weren't afraid to talk about sex. They weren't afraid to have sex. And in fact, they argued that they had the best sex of
Mm,
anybody, but it just had to be contained within a heterosexual patriarchal marriage.
right.
And that's was God's will for sexuality. So there's this really problematic set of teachings around evangelical sexuality. That is that men, God filled them with testosterone, so they have this really insatiable sexual drive. Boys will be boys, and that's why women have to protect purity. So women cannot seduce or tempt men who are not their husbands, but women who are married have to fulfill their husband's every sexual need. So what
Mm,
happens then is when men engage in any sort of sexual misconduct, there is always a woman to blame.
yeah.
Even if that woman is a 5-year-old girl, what did she
Yeah.
do to seduce him? Right. It's that bad. And the wife is often blamed. Well, clearly you weren't meeting his sexual needs. So this is in these Christian sex manuals, not just from the 60s, all the way up to the present. You
Mm,
will find these teachings. So it's no surprise that you also find a whole lot of sexual abuse of power, and scandal in evangelical circles. And you have evangelicals who are utterly ill-equipped to deal with them.
obviously. And you talk about how they lobbied against the anti-moral programs like Three's Company, Dallas, and Saturday Night Live, which
Yeah.
we all grown to love today. And Time and Newsweek, not to be trusted. They fake news. The,
That goes
uh,
way back. Yep. You need
yeah,
your own sources. You need your own Christian sources. You
right.
need your own Christian news networks. So,
So all
they
these things, all this rhetoric that Donald Trump spews is definitely nothing
goes
new. And
way
that,
back.
right, right,
Yeah. Yeah. And of course, evangelicals would be drawn to him. Again, this isn't a betrayal of these values. He was tapping into precisely these values.
right. Uh, Christian Reconstructionism. Could you
Yeah.
talk about that? What that is? What that entails?
Yeah, so Christian Reconstructionism, and we can talk about Rushdoony in particular
Right.
as this also fringe figure, and a lot of historians haven't really known what to do with him, how to deal with him, because
Hmm.
he is quite fringe. Another one of these
So
very
he had a different or a new approach, I guess, to
yeah,
yeah.
also very authoritarian.
Right.
The idea
He held
of
on to that. Yeah, but
yeah, yes. And, kind of God's law of that God's law should shape our human laws, our human society.
yeah.
And the structures of authority were very clear. And so there was racial authority. So Rushdoony and his followers, his teachings and white supremacy went hand in hand, extremely patriarchal.
Mhm.
So teachings that, women should not go to college, women should not have any kind of independent authority, absolute submission to their husbands. And there's some debates about kind of how mainstream and how fringe these are. Like for a long time, you bring up Rushdoony and people just, shut you down. But what we can see is if you look at evangelicalism as the series of networks, you can see
Mhm.
how Rushdoony's teachings were in fact influential in terms of key architects of the religious right, people like Howard Phillips, who played this important role, members of the Council for National Policy, also influential in terms of homeschool circles. And
Mhm.
homeschool at once seemed like a fringe movement. It's become a very popular movement. And, Christian school curriculum shaped around these teachings. Now, whether or not they're directly drawing from Christian Reconstructionism and Rushdoony, or just kind of running parallel and teaching many of the same things, it can be hard to decipher, but
Mm.
certainly has been one of the foundations for this patriarchal and authoritarian and white supremacist kind of versions of American Christianity.
And you said LaHaye he also embraced that as well,
Also
correct?
influenced, yes.
Right. And then we get into Jerry Falwell, who influenced Christianity as well.
Yeah, Jerry Falwell Sr. In Thomas Road Baptist Church, and he's
Right.
one of these figures who was central to mobilizing evangelicals to engage in partisan political politics, partisan politics. Right in the 1970s, he's really at the forefront. Founds the Moral Majority, and is working within his own church, Thomas Road Baptist Church, but also via radio and television ministries to really reach conservative Christians across the country, and is not shy at all about telling them who to vote for, how to vote, and how to engage in right-wing politics.
Right. And then you also talk about Carter,
Yes,
the beloved Carter, which they didn't think was so beloved. They you said that they thought he was
yeah.
a disappointment. They thought he was a wimp. And
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. They had such great hopes for him,
right,
and
right,
they didn't like him for all kinds of reasons. He
right,
supported the ERA, the Equal Rights Amendment. He supported feminism, and that, went against some of their core values. It was especially though his foreign policy.
right.
They felt like he had presided over this dramatic weakening of American power globally.
Right.
And,
Because they
and
have to always be under like you said, the threat of terrorism. I don't,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know,
And so,
at all.
Reagan was this breath of fresh air.
Right.
He
Yeah.
seemed to embody the rugged masculine leadership that Carter seemed to lack.
Right. The and then one of the last chapters we'll talk about briefly is the 10th chapter. No more Christian nice guy.
Yes.
When you get into John Eldridge,
Hmm.
when he gets into the warrior god.
Yes. Yes.
What is his 2001 book? You said, "Wild at Heart:
Wild at heart.
Discovering the secret of a man's soul, masculinity, and militaristic." Was it called?
I've got it right here. This is
Yeah,
Wild at
yeah,
Heart. Keep it close
right.
at hand. Discovering the
You said
secret
that
of
was
a
a huge.
man's soul.
Also was a huge influence.
Oh yeah, sold
Uh,
more than 4 million copies. Right,
right,
this was a really big deal. So what
right,
happens very briefly in the 1990s? The Cold War comes to an end. There's this time of experimentation, not really sure what's happening next. We have the evangelical men's movement, the Promise Keepers movement. That's familiar if you're anywhere close to American Christianity in the 1990s. But there's a lot of kind of experimentation, and it was a time of confusion. And then you see this kind of backlash against this moment of possibility and maybe egalitarianism, maybe step back from partisan politics, culture wars, and so on. And you see this retrenchment. And in 2001, 3 books appear in the early months of 2001 that are kind of, the pendulum has swung back to a more militant Christian masculinity. There's James Dobson's Bringing Up Boys, where testosterone is key to masculinity, teach your boys to fight and play with guns. And you've got Doug Wilson's Future Men, very misogynistic and militant. And then you have John Eldridge's Wild at Heart, and it becomes this runaway bestseller because it is on the shelves of Christian bookstores when terrorists attacked the United States on September 11, right? And so this Eldridge wrote that God is a warrior God, and every man is made in his image. Every man has a battle to fight. And so the battle was no longer metaphorical. We had the battle. And post 9/11, these books on militant Christian masculinity just fly off the shelves. For a generation, there's this like kind of copycat industry of dozens of these books appear. Same cast of characters: Teddy Roosevelt, John Wayne, William Wallace from the movie Braveheart, cowboys and soldiers, and really kind of build up this masculine ideal, this warrior ideal, and present Christianity as a militant us versus them faith. And preemptive war is critical. You better get them because they'll get you.
God, or like you said, God created all men to long for battle.
Yes.
Yeah.
And a beauty to rescue.
Right. The as far as your title, you in your conclusion, you were talking about the gospel band.
Yes.
In the 1980s, I didn't know
Gaither
that.
vocal band, yeah.
The Gaither vocal band. What state were they from? Or they were Midwestern?
Kind of Midwest. The actual folks kind of move in and out of this group, but but it's the Gaithers, and
gotcha. And they had that single Jesus and John Wayne, and that's
one
stuck
of the
with you, I guess.
I mean, honestly, I was toying with calling the book Jesus and John Wayne first, and then through searches I found out,
then you heard about the song. Okay, gotcha. It's just like over here, I named my YouTube channel The Real Nordic Black, and then I found out years later that they had a Nordic Black theater, and some people here in Oslo, Norway, and they swear that some people think I took it from them, or they think I worked for them, which is crazy. I never even heard of them. But anyway,
that's how this goes. I did all my searches. Gotcha. And I thought this is perfect there. And since the book has come out too, so many people have shared their John Wayne stories, their Jesus and John Wayne pictures, and so it is a thing. But I mean, really, it's also just a symbol of the influence of these cultural ideals on American Christianity and how that ends up transforming the faith, or for what I say in my subtitle, corrupting a faith and fracturing a nation.
Right. Let's go to some of the questions here. Somebody asked, let's see. Thank you. About evangelicalism. Let me see. Promotes free market capitalism. All over North. No. He asked how does this fit into the with organizations like the Fellowship? She does talk about the Fellowship in the book. I just didn't get to that. Maybe you just talk a little bit about it. I guess that's linked to Billy Graham,
and Jeff Charlotte's work on that is where you want to start. But yes, there's definite overlap, and Charlotte talks about in both in the
I don't talk about everything in my interview. I don't mean I didn't read it, so I'm just letting people know
it's there.
So, that's proof right there, for sure.
So there's definite overlap. That would be one expression of these values, and they also very much embrace this kind of gender difference, gender separation, and that Christian masculinity and kind of leadership should express this rugged masculinity and somewhat secretive organization. I actually had, decided not to write too much about that because I was up against so much in terms of word count. There's a lot packed into this book. And I thought, how can I begin to explain the Fellowship to people who've never heard of it? There's so much there. And then as the book was in copy edits, the Netflix documentary came out, and I thought, okay, now enough people have heard about it. I can talk a little bit more. And so there's a few lines in the book about the Fellowship and how there's a lot of overlap.
Well, we got a conspiracy theorist on in the chat right now, so
Oh,
he's really into that right there. So he said the fellowship feels like some sort of shadow government, or at least a super lobbyist, or is that overstating the case?
oh,
Uh,
it's hard to know what,
yeah,
what's going on behind closed doors, and it's influential not just in the United States, but but globally. And I think that's in some ways where I'd be most interested if you're a conspiracy theorist and looking at
no,
how these
he is.
networks
He just don't
shape
want to admit
global
it. Yeah, yeah,
politics.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. All right. Is there any new thing that you're working on at this
Yes.
moment that you
Yes.
can mention?
I can mention, yeah, my
Okay.
next book. It's public. It's called Live, Laugh, Love, and it is a
That
cultural.
sounds familiar.
It's a cultural history of
Is
white
that
Christian womanhood.
love
Live,
life?
Laugh, Love.
Yeah, but
Yeah,
then
it's
wasn't there a movie called No, Pray,
that. No,
Love, and
that's Eat, Pray, Love.
Eat, Pray, Love, and
Live,
then they
Laugh,
made a
Love. I mean, if you go to
okay.
Hobby Lobby, you'll see this on wall plaques all over the
Yeah,
place. It's
gotcha.
a
Yeah,
thing.
yeah,
So it's
yeah,
essentially looking at this kind of white women's culture, kind of generic culture of white Christian womanhood in America, looking at popular culture, things like inspirational fiction and mommy blogs, HGTV. Hobby Lobby will make an appearance again.
yeah.
And looking at
You're really trying to piss those people off.
I try. And then I analyze this all in terms of neoliberalism and
Right,
post-feminism and white
right.
supremacy.
That's why I figured you was from the Midwest when you start to talk about Hobby Lobby,
Oh
how
yeah,
much you were going in. This woman is from the Midwest for sure.
absolutely born and
Ain't
bred.
no ain't nobody heard of. If you start talking about Sonic or I don't know, but someone said very interesting about the anti-democratic points you bring up. Do you talk more about that in the book?
Yeah, I mean, I talk about authority. Really, is a
Yeah,
theme. Is at the heart of this book. It's about authority, and it's a book about power.
right.
And yeah, so that is a theme. I give some drawn a little bit of survey data to show that authoritarianism is a thing within
So you do a
conservative
little
evangelicals.
quantitative,
I mean, I don't do it.
quantitative.
I just take what other people are doing and mention it. But yeah,
Gotcha.
there are definite links, and that is a theme of the book. Yes,
Okay. Now you are a professor at Calvin University. Does that mean is it a Calvinist?
it is. It is. Yes.
Are you a Calvinist?
I am. I'm one of those
Okay.
Calvinists who doesn't really fit with the Calvinists that I write about in this book, and
Right,
that
right,
makes it a little bit of fun. Yeah.
right. The last we're almost done. The last name though is Dumay.
Dumais is
Oh, I wanted to
French.
ask you that from the beginning. Yeah, I figured. Okay.
Yeah, so
Right.
that's actually my husband's name. My
Mm,
last name is Kobus, but both are essentially Dutch. So my mom was an immigrant. My both sides of my
okay.
family Dutch immigrant, and Calvin was settled by Dutch immigrants. And
Yeah.
Dumais is actually a Dutch name in disguise. It's Huguenot, so we're Dutch.
Wow. Okay. Okay. Well, yeah, no, I think we had a quick hour. I just wanted to go through a few points and
Yeah.
also some of these questions. I think there's no more questions here. No, that's about it. So you said the thing that you're working. Oh yeah, the website is Christine Dumais, spelled K-
KristenDumais.com. Yep.
yeah, K.
KristenDumais.com. And I put a
Right.
lot of my writings up there. But if you want to follow me, probably the easiest way is on Twitter at KKDumais, at KKDUMEZ. I'm there way too much.
Just
Way
like
too
I'm on.
much.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. True, true. Alrighty then. Yeah, I think there's no more questions in the chat, so I think we can finish this up. Thank you
Yeah.
very much
Thank
for
you.
your time. I see. Are you in the office now? Or
I'm at my home office right now.
oh, okay, got you, got
Yeah.
you. Yeah, yeah. Well, thanks for your time, and yeah. Uh, hope to. When's the next work going to be published? Or
Oh, it's going to be a couple of years still. We're thick in
okay,
the research. My researcher
got you.
assistants are over at the college right now working on
Okay.
it, and I'll be joining them in a few minutes. So
Okay, cool, cool, cool. Alrighty then. Well, thank you very much. I will be promoting your work and hopefully in a couple years or so, if
yeah.
we all are still around and
Yes.
this survive this pandemic and all that, we'll get back
We'll be
with you.
right back. Sounds
All right.
great. Thank you so
All right.
much.
Thank you very much.
Take
All
care.
right. Bye-bye.